I thought this night would be my triumph. A company dinner, a promotion on the horizon, my wife Sarah by my side, everything was perfect. But one missed call, one shadow in the hallway, and one whisper behind the door made me doubt everything. What I saw was not just a betrayal. It was the beginning of the end. The soft hum of conversations and the clinking of glasses filled the grand ballroom of the Lexington Hotel, a venue known for hosting New York's elite. The annual corporate dinner of Lancaster and Company was in full swing, a night of celebration, networking, and the much-anticipated promotion announcements. For most, it was just another lavish evening. But for Nicholas Williams, it was supposed to be the night that validated everything he had worked for. Nick had spent over a decade in the company, climbing the ranks with relentless dedication. He had sacrificed weekends, worked late nights, and taken on projects no one else wanted. Tonight was his moment. He was one of the leading contenders for a major promotion to senior vice president, a position that would change his life financially and professionally. His wife, Sarah, was by his side, her hand lightly resting on his arm. She looked stunning in an elegant black dress that hugged her slender frame, her auburn hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. Sarah had always known how to turn heads, and tonight was no exception. She charmed his colleagues effortlessly, her laughter ringing out like a melody in the upscale venue. Nick had always been proud of her, not just for her beauty, but for her intelligence and grace. They had been married for 8 years, weathering ups and downs together. While his career took center stage, Sarah had supported him, often putting her own ambitions aside. At least, that's what he had always believed. "Excited?" she asked, her voice warm but carrying a hint of something he couldn't quite place. "A little," he admitted, offering a small smile. "Tonight could be the night." She squeezed his hand. "I know it will be. You deserve this." Nick nodded, but something in her eyes seemed distant, like she was present in body but not in spirit. He brushed it off. Maybe she was just tired. As the evening progressed, Nick found himself engrossed in conversations with senior executives and colleagues. Sarah, meanwhile, was mingling, moving through the crowd with the grace of someone accustomed to these events. Every now and then, Nick would spot her in the distance, engaged in animated discussions, often laughing. It wasn't unusual. Sarah was sociable, and people gravitated toward her. But then he noticed something, or rather someone. Mark Foster, his boss, stood near the bar, speaking with Sarah. At first, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. Mark was a powerful figure in the company, known for his sharp instincts and ruthless ambition. He had mentored Nick early in his career, and though their relationship was professional, there had always been an undercurrent of competition. Nick watched as Sarah placed a hand on Mark's arm, laughing at something he had said. The touch was brief, almost insignificant, but it sent a ripple of unease through him. He wasn't the jealous type, but something about the way they interacted felt off. Mark leaned in slightly, his posture relaxed, as if he was sharing something meant only for her. Sarah nodded, her lips curling into a smile that seemed more intimate than necessary. Nick took a sip of his whiskey, pushing away the discomfort rising in his chest. He was being paranoid. Sarah was friendly, and Mark was just another executive. But even as he tried to dismiss it, the image lingered in his mind. Moments later, Sarah returned to his side, her expression unreadable. "I need to step outside for a bit," she said, holding up her phone. "It's a work thing." Nick glanced at the screen. No name, just an incoming call from an unknown number. "Now?" he asked, brow furrowing. "In the middle of the event." She nodded, already stepping away. "It won't take long." Nick watched her disappear through the double doors leading to the hotel lobby. He exhaled sharply, telling himself not to overthink it. But the feeling gnawed at him, a small but persistent whisper in the back of his mind. He turned back to the conversation, forcing a smile as his colleagues continued their discussion about market trends. The laughter, the music, the chatter, all of it felt distant, muted. He checked his watch. 10 minutes had passed. Then 15, 20. Nick scanned the room, expecting to see her somewhere, maybe near the bar, engaged in another conversation. But she was nowhere to be found. His unease deepened. He pulled out his phone, considering texting her, but something held him back. Instead, he rose from his seat and made his way towards the exit. The hotel lobby was quieter, the sounds of the gala muffled behind thick doors. Nick's eyes darted around, searching for Sarah's familiar figure. He walked past the reception, glancing toward the entrance where guests occasionally stepped outside for air or to take calls. Nothing. Then he saw him. Mark Foster. The man was walking down a dimly lit hallway, away from the main event. Alone. Nick's heart pounded. He hesitated for only a second before following. His footsteps were silent against the plush carpet as he trailed Mark through the corridor. The hallway led towards the private meeting rooms, areas reserved for executives and special guests. Nick reached the end of the corridor just in time to see Mark slip inside one of the rooms. The door didn't close all the way. He swallowed hard, adrenaline surging through him. His mind raced, every possibility flashing before him in rapid succession. Maybe it was a business call. Maybe Sarah wasn't even in there. But deep down, he already knew. Nick stepped forward, pressing a hand against the door, and slowly pushed it open. What he saw made his blood run cold. The moment Sarah disappeared into the crowd, an unsettling feeling settled in Nick's chest. He tried to shake it off, forcing a smile as he continued his conversation with a few colleagues. But his mind wasn't in it. His eyes kept darting around the grand hall, scanning faces, searching for his wife. Every few seconds, he'd glance toward the entrance, the bar, the balcony, anywhere she might have gone. Nothing. His stomach tightened. How long had it been? 20 minutes? 30? He pulled out his phone. No messages. No missed calls. He knew she had a tendency to get lost in conversation, to charm people into lingering discussions. But tonight was different. His gut told him so. Looking for someone? Nick turned. It was Ethan, one of his coworkers. The man swirled the whiskey in his glass, raising an eyebrow. There was something knowing in his gaze. Sarah, Nick admitted. She stepped out to take a call, but it's been a while. Ethan let out a low chuckle. A call, huh? He took a slow sip. I saw her head toward the back hallway about 10 minutes ago. Looked like she was in a hurry. Nick frowned. The back hallway? That wasn't where the restrooms were. That wasn't where anything was except. His heart pounded. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Maybe she had just stepped out for air. Maybe she'd run into someone she knew. Maybe. He didn't wait to finish the thought. He nodded to Ethan and turned on his heel, weaving his way through the sea of well-dressed executives and their polished, practiced smiles. The further he moved from the main hall, the quieter it became. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses faded into the distance. The hallway ahead was dimly lit, lined with doors leading to smaller meeting rooms and offices. Nick's footsteps slowed as he approached a door slightly ajar. A faint noise came from inside. His pulse thundered in his ears. He stepped closer, careful, silent. And then he heard it. A muffled laugh. A voice too familiar. Sarah. Nick's throat went dry. He moved before he could think, pushing the door open wider. The sight that met him stopped him cold. Sarah was standing too close to Mark Foster, his boss. Her hand rested on Mark's chest, fingers lightly tracing the fabric of his suit. Mark's hand, in turn, was on her waist, far too comfortable, far too familiar. They weren't just talking. They weren't just standing there. They were caught in something that should have never happened. Sarah's eyes widened as she spotted Nick. Mark stiffened, his hand dropping immediately. Nick, Sarah breathed, taking a step back. It's not. Nick's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He didn't need to hear it. Didn't need the excuses, the justifications, the lies. What the hell is this? His voice was eerily calm. Too calm. Mark recovered quickly, straightening his tie, his expression unreadable. Nick, this isn't what it looks like. Nick let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. Really? Because it looks like my wife is throwing herself at my boss in the middle of our company event. Sarah's face crumpled. Please, just let me explain. Nick held up a hand. No, he said. I don't want an explanation. I want the truth. His gaze locked onto Mark's. How long? Mark exhaled, rubbing his jaw. He didn't answer. Nick turned to Sarah. How long? Tears welled in her eyes. Nick, how long, Sarah? She flinched. Then, in a broken whisper, she answered. 6 months. A weight crushed his chest. He had suspected something was off for a while. Small changes in Sarah's behavior. Little red flags he had ignored. but hearing it, confirming it, was something else entirely. Mark cleared his throat. "Nick, I think we should talk in private." Nick laughed bitterly. "Private? Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? Just like all the private meetings you've had with my wife." Mark's expression darkened. "You're making a scene?" Nick stepped forward, lowering his voice to a deadly calm. "No, Mark, you made the scene. I'm just the poor bastard who walked into it." Sarah sobbed, reaching for Nick's arm. "Please, let's go somewhere to talk." Nick yanked his arm away as if burned. "There's nothing to talk about." He took a deep breath, steadied himself, then turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Sarah and Mark standing in the wreckage of their betrayal. He didn't look back. Nick sat in his car outside the apartment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The image of Sarah and Mark together was burned into his mind, an inescapable loop that played over and over again. He wanted to scream, to punch something, but instead he just sat there, frozen in disbelief. After what felt like an eternity, he forced himself to move. He stepped out of the car, his legs feeling like lead as he made his way toward the door. He knew Sarah would be inside, waiting, probably rehearsing her excuses. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to hear them, but he had to face her. He had to hear her say it. The moment he stepped inside, Sarah jumped up from the couch. Her eyes were swollen, red from crying. "Nick, please, let me explain," she pleaded, taking a step toward him. He held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Explain? Explain what, Sarah? That you've been sleeping with my boss? That you've been lying to me for who knows how long?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying sharpness that made Sarah flinch. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." Nick let out a hollow laugh. "You never meant to hurt me? Do you even hear yourself?" He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "Just tell me why." She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I don't know, Nick. I was lonely. You were always working, always chasing that promotion. Mark, he noticed me. He made me feel wanted. So you thought betraying me was the answer?" He shot back. "I was working for us, Sarah, for our future, and you threw it all away for what? A cheap thrill?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I made a mistake. I know I did. But I love you, Nick. Please, we can fix this." Nick stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to believe her, to believe that what they had was salvageable. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some things couldn't be undone. "I can't do this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I deserve better than this." Sarah sobbed, collapsing onto the couch. "Please, Nick, don't do this." But he was already walking away. He grabbed his keys, pausing only for a second before heading toward the door. "Goodbye, Sarah." As he stepped outside, the cool night air hit his face, and for the first time in hours, he felt like he could breathe. He didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain. He was done looking back. Nick sat in his office, staring blankly at the computer screen. The silence in the room was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his mind. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but the weight of everything that had happened made it impossible to focus. The betrayal, the lies, the deception, it all played in his head like a broken record. His phone vibrated, snapping him out of his thoughts. He hesitated before picking it up, his heart pounding as he read the name on the screen. "Sarah." He took a deep breath and answered. "Nick, please." Her voice was desperate. "I need to explain." "Explain what?" he asked coldly. "That you lied to me? That you were conspiring behind my back?" "It's not like that," she pleaded. "You have to believe me. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." Nick clenched his jaw. "Scared? You weren't scared when you were laughing with Mark. You weren't scared when you were texting him behind my back." There was silence on the other end. Then, a shaky breath. "Nick, I love you. I never meant for any of this to happen." Nick laughed bitterly. "Love? You call this love?" Another pause. Then, more softly, "I made a mistake. But Mark, he was manipulating me. He made me feel like I had no choice." Nick rubbed his temple. He had spent so much time analyzing financial risks, business strategies, predicting market trends, but he had failed to see the warning signs in his own marriage. He exhaled sharply. "I don't care anymore, Sarah. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." He ended the call before she could respond. He needed to clear his head. Standing up, he grabbed his coat and walked out of the office. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside. He had always believed in hard work, integrity, and loyalty. But now he realized those values only mattered to those who actually upheld them. He wouldn't let this break him. He wouldn't let their betrayal define his future. Nick walked forward, the city lights illuminating his path. It was time to start over. Time to rebuild. Without Sarah, without Mark, and without the weight of their lies dragging him down. Nick stood in front of his apartment window, watching the city hum with life below him. The night sky was a sea of flickering lights, each one representing a story, a life, a future. His own story had taken an unexpected turn, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was drowning in it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another message from Sarah. He didn't have to read it to know what it said. The same apologies, the same pleas to talk. He had ignored the last dozen messages, but something inside him told him to open this one. He sighed and reached for the phone. Nick, please. I know I messed up, but we were more than this. You and I, what we had, it was real. Don't throw everything away. Just meet me. One last time. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. The rational part of him knew better than to meet her. What good would it do? But another part of him, the part that still remembered the good times, hesitated. Before he could second-guess himself, he typed a reply. Tomorrow, noon, at the coffee shop on 5th. One last conversation. That's it. The next day, he arrived early. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air as he took a seat near the window. He didn't have to wait long. Sarah walked in, looking like a shadow of the woman he had once loved. Her eyes were tired, her expression unsure. Thank you for coming, she said softly, sitting across from him. Nick studied her, searching for something. Regret, sincerity, truth. Say what you need to say, Sarah. She swallowed hard. I know I can't undo what I did, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, even when I was making the worst mistake of my life. Nick let out a dry laugh. Love? If that's what you call love, I don't want any part of it. Her eyes glistened, but she nodded. I understand. I just didn't want this to end with silence. He sighed, leaning back. Sarah, it ended the moment you chose him over me. This meeting won't change that, but I appreciate the closure. She wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. Goodbye, Nick. As she walked out, Nick felt an unexpected weight lift off his chest. He had finally closed the book on this chapter of his life. He watched her disappear into the bustling streets, then signaled for the check. It was time to move on, fully, completely, and without looking back.